Hello everyone, and welcome to Fable Hayman, our second guide for Iratus Lore of the Dead. We are approaching the second boss in our playthrough, but don't worry, there will not be any spoilers, because today we are talking about the systems of Iratus. I'm going to go through and explain everything about our crypts, about your home away from home, and how I think to best utilize the various systems available to you in Iratus. We've gone over the creations. There is a guide that I will link down below that we did. I talked about every single creation and how I think they are used, how I think that they can be fitted, and how you can best utilize the materials that you have at hand. But beyond the creations, there is more. Everything that Iratus does is to support his creations and his ambition to conquer the world. So, how do we best do that? Well, there are a number of things that we can use to help us. Within the crypt alone, we have the artifacts. These are items equipped by Iratus himself, the supreme necromancer, wielding the power of ancient items that we did not roll well. There are some very good artifacts out there, my friends, but we don't have them. So, that's a little disappointing, but I will explain the artifacts nevertheless. Of course, next is Alchemy. The power of alchemy, a lost art. Very strong. So we'll go over all of the different aspects of alchemy. There is a new alchemy mechanic in the works as well. I'm so excited for that. That will be in the fall 2020 DLC. Ooh, it's gonna be good. So this might be outdated by then, but you know what? Until then, I'll cover everything that's available. Then there are the talents. Now, I have a bit of a controversial opinion on talents, but this increases the base effectiveness of just about everything in the game, and allows Iratus to interfere with the battlefield himself by reaching out into the void and crushing the souls of his foes. Last but not least, of course, we've seen the dungeon map. This is where you scout out where you're going. It's always handy to have a magical map at hand, is it not? You can see we're very close to the second boss. But again, no spoilers. Last but not least is the Humanorium. I'm afraid to click this button because I just said there wasn't going to be any spoilers. But here, here you go. The Humanorium is much like a Pokédex from Pokemon, if you are familiar. It collects these little cards that explain all the characters. It shows their stats, what they look like, their abilities. It's very useful for referencing, and I reference it many, many times. Now, it's not, unlike the Pokédex, it's not guaranteed that you're going to, unlock a slot. As you can see, I'm missing one enemy from the first floor. I could sit here and try to figure out which one it is, but that might take some time. So yeah, I'm not going to. But very helpful, as you can see. Slight spoilers ahead. So those are all of the things here. We'll start with the Humanorium since we're already here, and I already explained it. There you go. Keep this in the back of your mind, especially on higher difficulties. Good always wins, one of the many Eternal Harvest ranks. This will help you know what to bring to what fight, because trust me, it gets scary. Now, and of course there is the graveyard, but the graveyard is its own little beast, so we're going to talk about that after we finish everything in the Chamber of Iratus. So, let us begin. The artifacts. The relics of power, wielded by the Supreme Necromancer. First, allow me to explain what you're looking at. Over here on the right are your artifacts and your consumables, which are basically like artifacts that you use a single time. You can sort them however you wish if you have a lot of them. I wouldn't recommend hoarding them, really, because if you don't like an artifact that you have, you can disintegrate the artifact to provide experience for Iratus. That's important so that he can level up and gain more talents. Leveling up also affects alchemy, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So you have a slot for an armor piece, a ring, an amulet, a weapon, and then the consumable slot. We don't have very good things here, but we have things here. On the left side of your screen, you can see Iratus's status. Lovely little picture there. My Iratus is presently rank 29. You can see his experience bar. This spell power, what this does is spell power affects every single spell in a different way. Sometimes it increases its efficacy. Sometimes it reduces its mana cost. Basically, spell power is just helpful for interfering with the battlefield. There are some incredibly fun builds that manipulate high levels of spell power and allow you to do some really wild stuff. And I would love to test those, and hopefully someday I get to. Wrath at the start of battle. This is how much wrath you begin with, as you might have surmised. It's pretty straightforward. Wrath, of course, funds your ultimate abilities for every single character. You can increase this, I'm assuming, by an artifact. I don't actually remember if there is one off the top of my head. And you can increase this by building the Abode of Wrath in the graveyard. Unfortunately, I've neglected that, and I do have a tendency to do so, but, you know, it's up to you. Mana restored after battle, presently 0. If you are playing on More Pain or Cakewalk, Iratus does have a baseline amount of mana restoration. There's also a talent that gives him some, and you can build the statue of Iratus in the graveyard. But as you can see, I've done none of that. And that's mostly because between the Shade and the Dark Knight's items, I'm able to just refund my own mana in combat. But if you are using a lot of spells, highly recommended to increase this stat. And that is all for the artifacts. Look how triumphant he is. It's beautiful. Hopefully someday we'll look like that too. We've already discussed the creation, so we'll move on to Alchemy. Now, Alchemy has 4 different sections: transmutation, calcination, distillation, and extraction. Since extraction is already highlighted, let's start here. Extraction is how you create items. You can see the list of items over here. I'm not going to go over all of them, but it takes 3 of one particular part to create. This helps empower your creations when you're either not feeling lucky or, like me, not being lucky. You can create your own things for them to equip. Now remember, each creation can only equip 2 things at once, and you cannot unequip them. You have to destroy them if you want to replace them. So keep that in mind when using valuable parts to create items. Next, let's discuss distillation. Actually, distillation and calcination are basically the same thing. Distillation allows you to use any part that you wish and brains to restore vigor to all minions. By default, it is 15%, but there is a talent in the alchemy tree to double this to 30%, which we have selected because I love alchemy. Calcination is the exact same thing, except it restores mana to Iratus. Remember, you can use any part or brain, 3 of them, to restore mana. Another way to restore mana if you are spending spells like crazy. We aren't really, but maybe we should. Last but not least, and most importantly, transmutation. This has gone through a few changes since the early access, and I think it's wound up in a decent place. Presently, the way that it works is that over here on the left side, you select whatever item you wish to create, whichever part that you are in desperate need of. Usually, it's dust for me, even though we're doing pretty good right now. So if I wanted to create dust, let's say, I could throw in any 3 parts. You cannot use brains for transmutation, it has to be parts. And then I can convert these to whatever my desirable part. You might be wondering, though, what is this in the middle of the screen here? These percentages. They removed the ability to just directly upgrade parts. So now, whenever you're transmuting, you have a chance to get a higher level item than what, baseline. And that chance is depicted here. And it is calculated based on the rarity of the items that you put in here and Iratus' level. So the higher the level, the more, the better your chances are. So say that we take out this dust, we put in a green dust. You can see the values have changed quite drastically, actually. I think that's much higher than it was before. Ooh, look at that. Oh, it's beautiful. I'm actually going to create this because I want to roll. Now this, fair warning, this is basically gambling. And, I'm very low on rags. I have a bad habit of just doing this and spending all of my parts. But let's see what happens. Let's roll it off.
It's no gold, but it will do.
What did I even get? What was it? A 6% chance to roll legendary? Okay, so now you can see why this becomes very addicting. I highly recommend not spending all of your parts on transmutations because you never know when something is going to die. But if you have a lot and you're bored, why not gamble? Please don't take that advice to real life. Now, there is an item for characters called the Glutton's Tongue. I don't have it. We haven't seen it in this playthrough. But what it does is it increases your damage by like 0.2% for every single part that you have in your inventory. If you are trying to make use of the Glutton's Tongue, of course, I recommend using this less. But hey, we have a lot of parts. We have a lot of parts, he says. What else do I need? Rags probably, right? Actually, I think I need ectoplasm for a lot of people. One more gamble. Just one more. Hit me.
Behold my work.
But there it is. There's Alchemy. Now, speaking of Alchemy in the talents tree, Alchemy is one of the 4 possible talents and the one that I love the most. And the reason, I do have a reason, okay? The reason is because I believe that a strong foundation leads to victory. And Alchemy helps you do that. The first talent I always pick, no questions asked, is to increase the amount of Digger's Souls you receive at the end of battle. This allows you to create more things in the graveyard. Then, over here in Amateur Surgeon, a higher chance to receive uncommon parts. We haven't been very lucky with this, but I shudder to think of how less lucky we would be if we didn't have this. And then Surgical Practice. Did that get buffed? That used to be 30%, right? Basically, Surgical Practice is the same thing. Now, another thing spread throughout all of the talent trees is something like Durable Materials. Minions gain +8 Vigor. These are just flat stat increases to all of your creations, 0 questions asked. So I highly recommend sprinting towards these. One in particular that I think is a necessity for everyone is Advanced Ballistics in the Ire tree. This just gives +12 accuracy to everyone all the time, no questions asked. It does cost 4 points because you need 1 point in Wrath Unchained, 1 point in Amok, and then you can get the Advanced Ballistics. But highly, highly recommended. As for how I would build the talent tree, again, I have an obsession with alchemy. I like filling out the alchemy tree. It basically just gives you a higher chance of getting things. That's why we have so many parts. You can get some more artifact chances, more brains. I really like just having extra materials on hand. Now, on higher difficulties, well, before I get into that, one of the best parts of alchemy, if you fully commit to it, like I kind of have, is necromancy power. We discussed this in the alchemy portion, but after you distill, which is the thing that increases or restores vigor, all minions deal 10% more damage and receive 10% less damage from in battle. This is the real big payoff here in the alchemy tree, and it's pretty good. 10% can be a lot in the grand scheme of things. So if you like that idea, nice. But it does, of course, take a lot of parts to fund that because it takes 3 parts and or brains to distill, and doing that before every combat will eventually become quite expensive. You can help fund that with Scalpel Artist, which gives you 1 additional part after combat. And then there's also Dark Enlightenment, which increases the amount of Wrath that Iratus gains in battle by 50%. This can be huge, depending on what build you're running. We generate a ridiculous amount of Wrath right now, however, using the Dark Knight and the Shades unique items. So this isn't really necessary for this type of build, but, if you weren't running them, this could assist a lot. But speaking of Wrath, there is a build in the Ire tree.
It's not really learning, rather remembering what was forgotten.
Yeah, I can see that. Over in the Ire tree, there is a very specific build where you don't really need to use your Wrath. Or maybe you're just generating so much Wrath that it's irrelevant. This entire tree on the right-hand side gives you something at the start of a turn if you have X amount of Wrath. So for example, at the beginning, a minion will gain +2 initiative for 2 turns if Iratus has at least 25 Wrath. The next one, if at least 50, the minion gains 4 Dread for 1 turn. If at least 75, a minion will restore 5 Vigor. If at least 100, Iratus will receive 36 Spell Power, which is a significant amount of Spell Power. That's more Spell Power than we have right now. The rest of the tree, you do get the full heal here. You might be wondering, why would you want to restore Vigor to your enemies? And it's usually if you're doing a stress build. Because if you're doing a stress build, you really don't care about your enemy's health. You care about their sanity, which this doesn't affect at all. It is very expensive. Super duper 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 expensive. Over in the destruction tree, as you might imagine, the destruction tree causes destruction. Almost all of this is dedicated to pure damage. I do highly recommend, if you are doing a build that focuses on hitting people, say with the ghoul or the skeleton or the headhunter, Hail of Teeth is probably a necessity. It's a free, easy 1 point, use this ability and remove 2 enemy block, which, if you're trying to kill them with physical attacks, is very helpful. So I pick this up almost every time. I wait until after I have the Advanced Ballistics, but I always pick up Hail of Teeth. The rest of this tree, Iratus gains 50 spell power if there are 2 or fewer minions left on the battlefield. Wow. This could be fun. The rest of the tree is just damage, and it's usually damaged with a stipulation. So for example, with the Volley of Spears, it just deals 25 physical damage, but it will deal additional damage if the target is debuffed. We have a lot of debuffs, so that could be good. I've never used this bomb thing, but, you know, you could, potentially with a lot of spell power, you could make this one-shot people, and that sounds hilarious. This one deals additional damage if the target is on fire. This one will set all enemies on fire. If you're playing around with an ignition build, Skullfall might be fun. Bone Obelisk, I do think is really helpful because it will stun the target, but it is incredibly expensive to get down to Bone Obelisk. So, I mean, that's 1, 2, 5, 9. That's 9 points. Ooh, so expensive. The Ire Tree, as you saw, is more about increasing your own minion's efficacy. I think over here, I like all minions and enemies gain. Over here, I do like Stoke the Flames and Infectious Lunacy. Stoke the Flames reduces your minion's damage.
Oh,
this one again. Stoke the Flames will reduce the damage that all of your characters take, and Infectious Lunacy will increase the damage all of your characters take. I think these are both incredibly helpful, especially on higher difficulties if you're just trying to burn things down and blow them up. But we haven't gotten that far yet. And of course, the Battle Eternal that I mentioned. The Magic Tree is more of a support, stress, utility-ish thing. If you do need to unlock the Vampire, this is where you do it. You pick up Arcana Antediluvium to get some free mana, which actually is very helpful. I do recommend picking this up. I just haven't done it yet. And then the Blood Curse, you have to Blood Curse an enemy, and then get them to escape. And after that, you will receive a Vampire. Do that 3 times, and you can make your own. Now, there's the ability down here, the Conjure Shadows. It summons a basic Shade Banshee or Wraith until the end of battle. This actually was quite hilarious back in ye olden days. When the ghoul used to eat her own allies, you would go down this tree to summon, weak stuff for pretty inexpensive, and then you'd have the ghoul eat them to empower the ghoul to make the ghoul just like one-shot things. It was hilarious. I don't actually know if there's videos of it out on the internet, but if there are, it could be a hilarious time. One of the most powerful things about the Magic Tree, however, the ultimate payoff, is the Finger of Death. This ability is absolutely bonkers. The target will lose 50%, 10% for bosses, of its maximum vigor and sanity. Removes all buffs from the target, target loses all blocks and wards, and it ignores ward. This ability is what I'm trying to head towards now, because combining this with the Shade, hello Plagueis, combining with the Shade and his Void Claws, you basically just Finger of Death someone, instantly kill them next turn with the Shade, and then restore that mana using the Void Flame. It is an incredible gameplay loop that is rewarding and very expensive to get to. You need to go down this tree in its entirety, well, minus blind, and down this tree, which requires getting a point in haste. It's so expensive, but that's because it's so good. Also in this talent tree, Dispel can be incredibly helpful. I actually lost a character to Ignition that I could have saved if I had put points in Dispel. So I do think Dispel becomes more of a necessity later on, and as enemies buff themselves more and more, like the 4th and 5th floor have some terrifying buffers, Dispel could save you a lot. There is also some incredible fun you can have with Fate. This will guarantee that the next creation's attack is a critical hit. I demonstrated this in our beta playthrough where I was using the skeleton. Whenever I applied Fate to him and then used Smite the Show-Offs, which deals or attacks twice and then will attack an additional time for every buff the enemy has, I could just crit for 5 times in a row. Boom. Dead. You can also use this, and how we'll be using it once we get it. You can use it on the Shade to guarantee that his Void Claws crits and deals obscene amount of damage. So what I'm saying is that the Magic Tree has a lot of really useful tools that you can use. The one we're saving for right now, which we're halfway through level 2 for, halfway to 3 points for, is Slake with Darkness. I don't think this ability is good by itself, but I use it as a way to remove enemy wards. Very much in the same capacity that I use Hail of Teeth to remove enemy block. So it really comes down to how you want to play. I recommend, and my personal playstyle preference, is to commit to the Alchemy tree very early on. Like, I think in this playthrough, I picked up Architecture buff, and then I went straight for Advanced Ballistics, traditional accuracy. Then I went back to Alchemy to start picking up these things to get more parts to do more things. And then I also made sure that I picked up... We have this and this. We picked up the Blackest Lodge for Dread. It is convenient that over in Alchemy you have the durable materials and a luck potion. Both of these base stat increases. Ooh, I've actually never used this. 15 spell power to one battle using calcination. I don't know if that's worth it. I mean, it could be if you're doing a bizarre spell power build, which I've never done, but I'm very curious in. Very curious. So that's basically Iratus' tree. I do largely ignore the destruction tree, which might infuriate some people. As I mentioned, Bone Obelisk is incredibly strong. It deals a lot of damage and stuns. This can save a life. A couple of lives. Rain of Gourd down here, it increases the damage that an enemy takes. It's basically afflicting... I'm actually curious, does this stack with the Unfrozen's Get Over Here ability? It does say...
Put here, I'll add a little. I take some of this and... Yes, I think I'll cut that and add... yeah, move this. Yeah. Oh, yes, that's right.
What just happened? It's like he was muttering to himself. It says doesn't stack, but does that just mean doesn't stack with itself or doesn't stack in general? I don't know. Could be a curious thing to test. But again, just to reiterate, I mostly ignore the destruction tree. It can be useful. It has its uses. Don't get me wrong. But I much prefer the magic tree for my shenanigans, and the Ire tree has a lot of useful buffs and passives that you can utilize well. Blind Fury is probably good to pick up because well, at least later on, there are a lot of evasive enemies that can give you some free wrath. But again, we generate so much wrath that it really, really doesn't matter. So it's a talent tree. If you have any specific questions, please let me know. I know that was kind of all over the place. But the community, I think, as a whole, for the higher difficulties, kind of shuns the alchemy tree. Like, not saying that they say it's bad, but that you need so much more from magic and destruction on the higher difficulty so that you can save your minions, that it's not worth putting this many points into alchemy. I disagree, in my humble opinion. But again, it comes down to playstyle. We'll see in the future when we begin our Eternal Harvest climb to victory if this comes back to haunt me. It might. I don't know. But that is it for the inside of our crypt, the chamber of Iratus. Hello, my good friend. Now it's time for the graveyard. The graveyard is a beast of its own, and this is what the Digger Souls are used for. You use the Digger Souls to construct various things and upgrade them. Now, similarly with our talents, I believe that a strong foundation is required for victory. So I always, without question, without thought, build the obelisk first. This is because it will give you additional Digger Souls after every combat. Well, not quest combat, but regular combat. Whenever you build something, these days, it was a great change. You sacrifice the minion to the place. You used to have to sacrifice the minion to build it and then put another minion in it to, do the thing or to occupy it or whatever. These days now, you just put in the minion and it will be sacrificed to the dark gods. So I'll build the statue to show it off. Let me pick up a brad real quick. That sounds terrible if you take it out of context.
A design from my younger years.
Aww. He wanted love. So the statue of Iratus, I haven't built it yet, but for every creature here, you gain +6 mana after combat. Again, it doesn't apply to quest battles. So you put in your minion. You can see that it will take 25 Digger Souls. We currently have 92. And we build it.
Now there's a handsome fellow. A shame his talents were never fully recognized back in the academy. I'll just take all this mana as repayment instead.
I don't actually remember that. But anyway, we built it. The bride is here. To upgrade it, we have to construct another character and sacrifice it once more. This time it is a lich. It can, if you're playing for the first time, it can be rather challenging to upgrade things because, of course, you have to unlock the creations first to be able to put them here. So, for example, the library, rank 3 might be pretty challenging because you have to complete the game in more pain before you can even do that. But the order that I like, I also like it to be very balanced. So we pick up the obelisk, then we pick up the library, because this will give Iratus additional experience, which is very important to get more talents and do better alchemy stuff. Then I head down, and I go to the Dead Lake to gain additional chance to find a random artifact. We have gotten incredibly unlucky this playthrough with artifacts, but they can give you tremendous power boosts. The one I'm looking for right now is the grappling hook, and I want it. It's like that commercial. What would you do for a Klondike bar? What would I do for a grappling hook? I actually don't want to know the answer to that. I also build the excavation because it increases the chance of finding a random part. And again, I enjoy just getting lots of parts to create more things, to play around with various builds, and also to have more parts for alchemy stuff. So I think it's very important to kind of keep these two sort of balanced out. I think that the obelisk and the library take absolute priority. And then I think it's these two. The mortuary is kind of bizarre. The mortuary, you put a wounded character in here, and then after you finish a combat that's not a quest battle, they will restore 50% of their vigor. The mortuary is kind of a build as needed sort of situation. We haven't needed a whole lot of it, so it's still only rank 2, and I actually haven't used it much, so maybe I didn't even need to upgrade it. But I had the Digger Souls laying around, so... So this is going to depend entirely on how much damage you're taking or how little you're doing distillation. Because we're relying so heavily on a single group, I'm kind of using alchemy to restore our vigor instead of the mortuary, which I can afford to do because of all of my points put into alchemy. Were they wasted? Probably not. Now the arena is the only place that still works in the old way. So for example, if we were to upgrade this and put a headhunter in, the headhunter would be consumed and it would now be an empty slot. That's because you put characters in here to gain experience while you're fighting. So we've had the headhunter, who has a name now. We put the headhunter in here to hang out while we were doing stuff with our A-team, and he was still gaining experience. So again, this comes down to your need. I do recommend when you're playing Iratus to have like 2 fully functional groups. This way you can kind of swap them in and out, or you can approach different battles with different tactics. We presently don't, because the A-team can take on everything and everyone. But whenever you are using one team, you can go ahead and throw your other minions in here to make sure that they continue to level up and don't get outscaled by the enemies, which is a very real threat on basically any difficulty that's not Cakewalk. Now, the Abode of Wrath. I mentioned this briefly when we were talking about Iratus' status. The Abode of Wrath, for every minion in here, you'll begin the battle with 10 Wrath. So right now, we begin the battle with 20 Wrath. Again, this is entirely dependent on what you're doing. Right now, it doesn't really matter for us. We generate an insane amount of Wrath, even though if you are using the Banshee in the same capacity that we are, hello, Sioyatar. I feel like I'm the only person that's ever named a character Sioyatar. At least in a roguelike. You can confirm or deny that. Sioyatar's Howl, it is her Wrath ability. It costs 50 Wrath, it's pretty expensive, but it will stun the first 2 targets, which can be invaluable, and it can save a life. So, if you wanted to start off with being much closer to this, unfortunately, because it costs 50, you can't actually begin with it. But getting 10 Wrath is a very, very easy. So, if we weren't just generating a bazillion Wrath with the Dark Knight and the Shade, then I could fill out the Abode of Wrath to start combat and basically instantly stun 2 characters, and hopefully generate enough Wrath repeatedly to just keep them stun locked the entire time. Similar idea with the Bone Golem, who does his stunning thing. Well, stunning chance. Down here. His costs 25 though, so you could Splintering March right off the bat if you had at least 3 people in the Abode of Wrath. So as I mentioned, it comes down entirely to your approach, to your team composition, whether the Abode of Wrath will be useful or not. I do think it's more useful than the Iratus statue, because there are many more ways to replenish mana than there is to generate Wrath. For generating Wrath, you have the item, the Heart of Emptiness, from the Dark Knight. You have the Void Flame from the Shade. You have the ability from the Dark Knight. This. Although him sitting there for a turn to generate Wrath is kind of scary. And the Vampire generates way more Wrath than him. And that's pretty much it, right? Items, of course, if you get lucky with artifacts. So generating Wrath is a trickier business, so I do think the Abode of Wrath takes priority over the Iratus statue, and replenishing mana is a lot easier, as you saw. If you're on More Pain or Cakewalk, you just have some free mana. There's, of course, the Arcana Antediluvium here in Magic. The Dark Knight can restore mana, the Bride of Iratus can restore mana, the Shade can restore mana, you get the point. So, that's kind of it. Just to finally summarize up the graveyard, Obelisk and Library, absolute priority. I feel like I should actually call it a library in a guide video. Whoops. Library, Obelisk, absolute priority. Dead Lake, Excavation, second priority. The Mortuary and the Arena depend entirely on how you need them. So, usually I feel like 2 slots is enough for the Mortuary most of the time. And for the Arena, it just comes down to how many things you want to keep leveled up. I imagine if you have 2 fully functioning groups, you're going to want to get this to level 4. But I don't think that is enough to over-prioritize the Library or the Obelisk. When it comes to the Abode of Wrath, I think this is like tier 3. Of course, it depends on how desperately you need the Wrath, but it takes priority, in my opinion, over the Iratus statue, which I think is the lowest priority, which is why I just built it for the sake of this video. I don't even know how far in we are, and I just built it. Just because of how many ways there are to cast spells. Of course, if you are leaning into the talents, into the magic tree, into destruction, into... Well, I don't think you want to do much in Ire as far as spending mana. But if you're leaning into the destruction tree, you probably do want the statue more so than the Abode of Wrath. It, again, entirely depends on how you are approaching the game and what you want to do. And that is it for your home away from home. I hope this was helpful. I hope that you are a little more accustomed with the Crypt of Iratus. And if you have any questions, of course, leave them down below. If you want to see any more guides, of course, leave them down below. This was also a request. So this is here entirely from the will of the people, which I'm sure Iratus doesn't ignore at all. Probably. So again, thank you all for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. Make sure that you subscribe and hit that stupid bell so that you can keep an eye on our task to take over the world. We are finishing up our playthrough, and by finishing up I mean approaching the second boss of our playthrough, and good always wins, which is not true. And then after this we will begin climbing the ladder of the Eternal Harvest, which has 5 levels. Oh boy. I hope to see you around. Bye-bye.